So recently I've been chopping and changing my setup a fair bit, and overall this is something that I've done pretty much forever. On PC you're given the choice to use pretty much whatever you want, and there's a lot of really good choices when it comes to peripherals out there. I've been asked a lot what's in my PC, along with all the gear I use, so today I thought we'd go over what I think are the best peripherals and just the best gear to perform well in games these days. So recently I did the opposite to what a lot of people are doing, and I went from a 1440p 240Hz monitor to a 1080p 240Hz. While 1440p 240Hz is really nice, I personally didn't think the technology is quite there for competitive gaming. When I first changed to 1440, I went from a BenQ XL2546 to an Alienware AW2721D. The bump in image quality was immediately noticeable and it was really nice, but I also noticed that the monitor was a lot more blurry and it just didn't feel quite as snappy as the old BenQ panel did. The settings menus were also very lacking on the new Alienware monitor, and recently Zowie actually sent me this, which is the XL2546K. It's the model up from the BenQ that I used to have, and after using it for a few weeks, there is a lot to like about it. Firstly, the frames. I play a lot of Battlefield 2042, which is a game that destroys even the best PCs. Before switching, I'd average around 180 frames. Now after switching, I'm over 200 most of the time. That kind of difference is huge in a game like this, and I felt it immediately. And the next thing that sets it apart is the backlight strobing. It's called Diac Plus, and it gives you some of the best motion clarity out there, which is definitely what helps you when you're playing fast and need to spot everything while moving around. This is something that I really missed in the Alienware monitor, and I was looking for a 1440p 240Hz that had a strobing technology, and I didn't really find any that were, offering that along with all the other features I wanted. I do think if Zowie ever released a 1440p 240Hz or even more refresh rate monitor, that would be absolutely unreal, and if it had Diac Plus, I think it would take over the market, but I don't know if they're going to do that. I really hope they do, but until then, this monitor is going to have to do. Now, the next thing that I really like about this monitor is the settings menus. So I'm red-green colorblind myself, and I will take advantage of literally everything to make it easier for me, because there are some maps and situations where it does actually affect me in-game. I mean, this is kind of the reason why I use these color settings that you see on screen right now. I have yellow enemies, purple squad mates, blue friendlies. I mean, this just makes it really easy for me to spot, but I do actually recommend these color settings. They are really nice. Anyways, specifically with the Zowie monitor, you get a few settings that I haven't really seen on many other monitors, especially the Alienware was really lacking in terms of options, whereas this one has things like color vibrance, black equalizer, and sharpness, which are all things I really missed, and I actually play with those quite a lot depending on the game I'm playing. So right now I'm playing a lot of Valorant off stream actually, but I also play Battlefield 2042 on stream and for YouTube videos. And for both those titles, I find having a bit more vibrance, sharpness, and black equalizer helps me out in game. Now, if you do want to try my settings, there's actually a link in the description to a Google Drive, and that actually has my settings file, which you can flash onto your monitor if you do have the same one. And if you don't have the same monitor, but you also have like a BenQ, they're all pretty similar in terms of settings, so I will just list out all my settings in there as well. You can even go on pro settings lists, because a lot of pro players use this monitor and they upload their settings as well. So you can just try different settings and see what works for you. But I'd recommend just loading into whatever game you want to play. If you have a monitor like this with this many settings, you just play with all the sliders until you get it looking right, and then you leave it. That's done. And that's what I did for Battlefield 2042 and Valorant, and it's been working really well. Now, as far as the negatives go, it is a TN panel, so the colors aren't quite as nice as an IPS, and the viewing angles aren't as good either. In saying that, as far as TN panels go, apparently the colors are actually pretty decent on this from other reviews I've seen of people that have the color correction technology and, checkers and all that. I don't know how all that stuff works, but I've heard it's actually pretty decent. But I'm not really fussed about it. This is a TN panel, and while it has a couple disadvantages, it also has a lot of advantages. And for gaming, this is the only monitor I need right now. The only way I can see it getting replaced is by the newer Zowie 360Hz version, or again, if they release a 240Hz 1440p, I will be first in line for that. But until then, this monitor has been really good. And if you're just gaming, if you just want a really good gaming monitor to sweat out with, I don't think you can really go past the Zowies. Now for mice and mouse pads, there's basically two setups which I heavily recommend. For mice, my favorite two by far have been the Logitech G Pro X Superlight and the Razer DeathAdder V3. The Razer DeathAdder is an ergo mouse and the Superlight is an ambidextrous one, so depending on what you prefer out of those two options, I'd recommend one of those two mice. Both mice are wireless. Apparently Razer's wireless is a little bit better, but then when you look at pro setup lists, I think the G Pro X is easily the most used mouse by pro players, so it really depends. I think either of them are really good and you can't go wrong. Now for mouse pads, I've tried a lot of those as well, And I think the best mousepad, and the one that I recommend to everyone, is the Artisan Zero Soft. It's a little bit pricey, but it's just so agreeable and easy to use. Apparently there are clones of this coming out now that are just as good, but for me I just trust the OG. Everyone that's picked one up that I've recommended it to has loved it, and I think it's a pad that works regardless of what kind of game you play or style of aim you have. Now the issue with a lot of mainstream mousepads is they have a coating on them which wears off only after a few weeks, leaving the mousepad to feel a lot different to what it did when you first got it. The other thing with this mousepad that a lot of others don't have is it is actually resistant to humidity, so if I start sweating or if it's really hot, I live in Australia, it does get pretty hot here, it doesn't really affect my mousepad at all. I still aim the same, it still feels pretty much the same, which is absolutely great. Now for a spicy suggestion, I'll also put the SkyPad 3.0 out there. For a long time I was using it with the G Pro X Superlight, and it's a glass mousepad, which is neat because you'll never wear it out. However, it does wear out mouse skates, and if your hand contacts the pad even slightly, it'll get stuck. You'll need to get used to it, and for games that require a lot of tracking like Apex or Battlefield, it's great, but I just couldn't make it work on Valorant, and it's less well-rounded than the Zero. Now, headphones are something I can't speak too much about as I'm not an audio expert, but I do know a few things. Firstly, dodge gaming headsets like the plague. They're really not as good as a decent pair of headphones, they're flimsy and not built to last, and getting a real setup isn't even that much more expensive. So for headphones, you want something open back. This tends to give you a lot better directional audio, and I've had these Sennheiser HD6XXs for years now, and they do absolutely everything I need. Other than these, the open back Audio Technicas are awesome. I had a pair of those for about 5 years. And there's also options from Bear Dynamic. Now the spicy alternative is a pair of IEMs. I know a lot of really good players are using these now, and for the longest time I was using a pair as well. I had a pair of Moondrop Blessing 2 Dusks. Now the pros are that they're really light, they don't give you a gamer dent, and they keep you cool in the heat. The cons are that the audio isn't quite as good as my Sennheisers, and they can get uncomfortable after long periods. Not the safest choice, but I really did love them for a while. Now for my keyboard, it's a KBD Fans 75 V2. I've got Zelio's V2 67-gram switches in there, which are a tactile switch, and this thing is really nice, but it actually might get replaced soon. It's having a few issues here and there, and the rest of my setup is all optimized around getting the lowest latency possible, and custom keyboards tend to have a lot higher latency, which makes me think that this could be something to improve on. It's been great for a few years now, awesome to type on, and if replaced, it will still get used for my uni work. And I also think 75% keyboards are the absolute master race. It's a great form factor that doesn't get used close to enough. Now finally, PC specs and optimization. I must get asked 10 times a stream, how do you get 200 frames on this game? And the answer is 80% hardware and 20% overclocking and optimization. Battlefield requires a really complete PC to run well. Good CPU, RAM, and GPU are all really helpful. I have a 5950X, 3080 Ti, and my RAM was tuned for about 2 weeks and is completely min-maxed in terms of timings. Now for overclocking advice, I'd recommend spending a good amount of time on your CPU and RAM. Make sure you're in a case with good airflow. A lot of people will buy all the best gear and then throw it in some really nice looking case, but a case that has zero airflow to it. I've got 9 case fans and 1 L bracket bolted over my RAM, so I have a fan over my RAM as well. It's really going a bit far for sure, but it works really well. Make sure you set it up with positive airflow in mind as well, and you should be good. A lot of the hardware these days actually boosts depending on temperature, so if you make sure it all runs really cool, it will actually get you more frames. Now to overclock your CPU and RAM, I'll link Freethy's channel below. He's got guides on all this stuff, and it's what I use to get started myself. Be patient, only do this kind of stuff if you feel comfortable with it. But if you're not really comfortable with going really hard on the overclocking, even just go through his BIOS guides and just make sure the options are right. Also go through his Windows guides, make sure you have a really optimized Windows build. There's a lot of frames and latency and all that kind of stuff. You don't have to overclock to get the maximum gains, but if you do want the max gains, you have an optimized Windows build, you go through all your BIOS settings and make sure that's all right, and you overclock everything, aside from the GPU if you're playing Battlefield. That is what I'd recommend doing if you feel comfortable doing that. For me, I got 40 to 50 frames just from doing that kind of stuff. It's really nothing to shrug off at all. Anyways, I hope this video was helpful, interesting, maybe inspiring for your setups. I've been through a lot of gear, trial and error, and here we are. I'll see you guys all in the next one though. Peace.